Mhm. Well, it's 3 o'clock. Good afternoon, everybody. We'll call the meeting of Sheriff County Board to order. We'll start off with roll call. Here. 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 He's excused today. Yep, he's at training. So, all right. Well, today, to start off with, we're very fortunate to have with us Dan Foth from the UW Extension. He's going to train us in, he's a local government education program person, and he's here to train us on the role of our county government in the open meetings and an open meetings overview and UW Extension resources. So with that, Dan. Yep, thank you.
As noted, my name is Daniel Foth. I'm a lawyer by training and education, but I like to refer to myself now as a recovering lawyer. I heard Trent Lott say that once when I was in DC working, and I thought it was great, so I stole it. And so the first thing I'd like to do with everybody, mostly for my benefit, is if you would all repeat your names for me, because the roll call went by really fast. How long you've been a county board supervisor, what you do when you're not a county board supervisor, and then something about yourself that other people might not know. So I'll start. Daniel Foth, UW-Madison Extension, Local Government Education Program. And I've been with UW-Madison for 4.5 years. Prior to that, I spent the better part of 40 years doing public sector infrastructure, primarily in the US, but also in Africa, island of Guam, and Indonesia. And something about me that a lot of people don't know is I read 3 to 5 books a week. My mother was a teacher. Our house had over 2,500 books, and I know that because when she passed, I had to try to donate all those books to libraries. I said, "Oh, no, we don't need those. Thank you." So let's start in the back, sir, with you.
Sir, that was my dad. This is Mark Kirsch.
Okay, now I know it's Mark. So,
Board here for 22 years.
and what you do when you're not on the board?
Town chairman for 42 years and gave it up this year.
Wow. And something about yourself that people might not know.
Well, they all know me really well. They don't know about me.
All right.
My name's Jesse Urban. I'm a newbie. I'm at this thing for a year, and outside of this, my wife and I started a nonprofit in 2015. So we operate a retreat facility for clergy in Plainfield since 2015, and something about me that people may not know. Well, probably the most interesting story that I have is I got shot on a business trip, and nobody wants to travel with me anymore. There was a burglar, and I didn't get shot because I was doing anything bad. There was a burglar. I tackled
Stick
him.
with that story.
He shot me in the foot. So.
Robert Wadle, I've been on the board different times, once for 14 years, then for 6. And I'm serving my second 2-year term, so I guess that's about 22, 24 on and off. I'm currently the town of Richford chairman, have been for the last 22, I think 22 years, 24. I work for Flight Family Farms, just started there back in November, running forklift in the potato warehouse. They sell these potatoes to Little Potato down in Madison, the forest, and then everybody buys them and part of that. Other than that, I guess everybody knows more about me than I know myself, so pass it on to Pat now.
My name is Pat King. I've been on the board probably 13 years. I was also the mayor of the city of Watoma for 2 terms. I'm still on the city council. I've been on that for, I don't know, 20 years. I also I work for Piggly Wiggly in Stone Ridge in Watoma. I've been in the grocery business for 30, 40 years, hoping to retire someday. um, um, and something they don't know about me? Probably not. Probably I'm pretty much an open book. I've been here all my life, so.
Okay,
Dave Bossard. I am just past my first year on the board. When I'm not here, I am a professional land surveyor. And something that most people probably don't know about me is I'm also a pastor at our church.
great. Everett.
Town board chairman for 34 years in the town of Springwater. Pick that up. Years old, probably.
Okay,
Mike Cap, and I'm the first person that started this thing. And out of the best people I've got all I've ever seen. From there, I'm still going. I'm gonna try to keep another little.
right.
My name is Bart Peterson. I worked at Wapaka Foundry for 40 years, retired 3 years ago. At that time, I was elected to the town board of Saxville as supervisor. I've been on this board for 1 year. Since retiring, I joined the local fire department. My son has a side business that I work for him on. My wife tells me I'm busier now than I was when I was working. And I guess about the only thing that I can think of that is unique is that I've never been shot.
Yet.
Mark Yasi from third term on the board. I retired from the sheriff's department after 37 years. So the fire chief in Red Granite, been on fire department for 49 years.
Great. And then John gets to do this twice today.
Yes, I'm John Jarvis. I joined the county board in 2019 as chair in 2020 or 2022. And something people maybe don't know about me is I sing in a gospel quartet.
So you may be interested when I gave this presentation to the staff this morning. I think we have enough people, we could form a band.
There we go.
We're missing a bass player, I think was the only thing we're missing. Well, thank you all for having me attend today. I appreciate this opportunity to talk a little bit about some of these subjects, and let's get started. We have just 7 hours dedicated to training, right?
That's it.
So,
Yep. Not a minute more.
good. Usually I get more of a rise out of people. So some of you have heard me speak before, apparently. So you all know where, now is it Washera? I always say Washera. My wife always corrects me. Is it Washera?
Sure.
We'll share.
Washera. Okay. Well, sorry for but butchering the name with my wife at least. So what's the role of Waushara County government? Now, for those of you who've been around for a while, you may say, what the heck, I know all this. But you may be surprised that there might be something here you hadn't focused on, or something you think might be true that in fact may not necessarily be so true. And then for the newbies, this hopefully will be helpful. Were any of you folks who've been in office for a year or so at any of the county association, county officers, county officials workshops? Okay, I thought I recognized you. So I'm sorry, you've got to listen to me again. So sorry for your hard luck. All right, so as hopefully you know, counties have a dual purpose. First and foremost, they're an arm of the state government. So you get to do what the state wants you to do. And then secondly, as permitted by state statute, you're also a local unit of government responsive to local needs. So in Wisconsin, under the statute, counties are governed by elected county board of supervisors, all of you folks. Each county is a body corporate. You can be sued or sue. You can acquire and hold, lease, rent, or sell real estate, personal estate for public purposes or uses. You can also do other acts as are necessary and proper to the exercise of the powers and privileges granted and the performance of legal duties. But again, that's what the state allows you to do that, but only in the context of state statutes. Because again, you are an arm of the state. So even your discretionary powers are limited by the state. And that makes you a little different from cities, some villages, and most villages and some towns, in that they have home rule powers where they can actually do things, decide to do things that aren't necessarily part of their state statutory granted duties. So how many of you, when you woke up this morning, thought of yourselves as visionaries? Well, in fact, that's your function, is visionary. You enact policy. And in order to enact policy, you've got to have some vision of today and most importantly, the future. Obviously, you would hold the staff accountable for the implementation of the policy that you folks develop and pass. You adopt the budget, levy taxes. You regulate within the statutory authority. You are involved, I hope, represent, and most importantly, accountable to the public. Hopefully your focus is more on long-term than past or short-term. And hopefully you're all focused on cooperating with the governments, the towns, the municipalities within the county, and also with contiguous counties around you, and then also through the Wisconsin Counties Association. So understanding your leadership within the context of county government, first and foremost, I've given you some context, what your role is within the context we're going to talk about, and understanding your board rules, which so all of you should have received a copy of the board rules when you were elected. And if you don't have one, get one from the clerk or from Melissa. This is the Bible for how you run your meetings. So keep that in mind. So first and foremost, you make decisions as a body. None of you, including the chair, has the ability to make any decision for the county, bind the county in any way, shape, or form, or order anybody to do anything on behalf of the county or for the county yourselves. Only the county board, the majority of the county board, has that power or function. So as part of that leadership effort, hopefully you will collectively inspire a shared vision that you all have for the county and where the county should go. For those of you who are new and sort of feeling your way, I encourage you to challenge the process from time to time. Ask questions. We'll talk a little bit about that later. Hopefully you're helping each other to act and encouraging your heart in addition to your head as you're making decisions. You have a county administrator form of government. So the collective body, the County Board of Supervisors, has decided to put the county administrator in charge of the day-to-day operations. So when I give this presentation to municipalities, to counties, towns, I always start with, you need to know and stay in your lane. Your lane as a county board supervisor is the things we've just gone over, but what's really important is that is your lane. Your lane isn't to decide by yourself how the world should operate and then everybody should follow. Your lane isn't to run the departments for you. That's why you've got a county administrator and department heads. But your lane might be helping the department heads understand some of the challenges that might be within your districts. So the county board chair presides over the meetings of the county board of supervisors when present. He administers oaths, countersigns all ordinances, can call special or emergency meetings, refers to resolutions, ordinances, communications to appropriate board members, provides guidance and direction to move issues through the board, and the board chair can make motions, vote, and participate in discussions because the board chair is also a supervisor like all of you. So in a lot of newly elected people are always surprised to find that the chair is a member of the body and therefore can make motions, vote, and participate in discussions. That said, however, if the chair decides to make a motion or participate in the discussion, it's appropriate under Robert's Rules of Order for the chair to step down and have either the vice chair or, depending on how the discussion goes, the second vice chair or another person appointed to actually run the discussion on that particular motion. Once that motion's over, then the chair can retake the chair seat and move forward. And notice here, I refer to your bylaws wherever your bylaws reference any of these areas. So you'll see this notation frequently. Oops. I did this a lot this morning. So another thing about knowing and staying in your lane is the difference between policymaking. Oops, missed something. Oh, here we go. I missed the supervisors. Oh. All right. So your supervisor functions are basically you're the legislative you have a legislative function. You make the laws for the county. You give budgetary approval. And so that means you're focused on developing and approving your annual budget. And one example I'd like you to think about in terms of your lawmaking and cooperative decision-making is remembering that when you're putting your budget together, you're effectively deciding policy for the county because when you fund something, that means you think it's important, correct? So, but the other thing to remember is when you fund one, you have a finite amount of dollars. So when you fund one item, that means you can't fund another item. So when you're thinking about how your budget's put together and what the priorities you have as a supervisor and the priorities the county has in terms of moving the budget forward and what it funds, keep those two considerations in mind. That a vote for one item means because you have finite money, you can't necessarily fund something else. And understanding the impacts between what you're voting for, what you're funding, and also the impacts for what you're not funding. Your authority, as I mentioned, and I've reinforced this a few times throughout this presentation, back when I lived in Atlanta, my wife, who's very Catholic, decided she wanted to go to one of these evangelical churches. And so we went one Sunday, me and 4,999 of our closest friends were at the service. And it's really a rock concert, disguised as a church service. And so when the preacher got up, a guy named Andy Stanley, who's written, by the way, some fantastic books on leadership, he was speaking, and it was pretty clear to me about 10 minutes into his sermon presentation, he didn't really call them sermons, but his talk, that he repeated himself a lot. And so on the way home, my wife is all jazzed up because of the music, and she thought it was all wonderful. And While we're waiting an hour to get out of the parking lot, as 4,999 of our closest friends were also trying to leave at the same time. She said, "What'd you think?" And I said, "Well, I think it was pretty interesting, but don't you think he kind of repeated himself a lot?" And she said, "Oh, I know. Wasn't it wonderful? I really understood it when he said it the third time." And I thought, well, there's a lesson learned. So ever since that, I've repeated myself on important points. And so, yes, you can blame my wife for that, happening. Also, really important, supervisor is a historical term, not a descriptive term. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about how you might want to instruct a department head or a member of the county staff as to how they should be doing their jobs. And again, this is covered in the bylaws, Article 1, Section H. So now we get to policy versus administration. So the policy, you, the board, are focused on the what and why. What is it you want to do and why do you want to do it? The staff is then focused on the how, when, and where, based on your whats and whys. So policy, what? Will we fund new highway equipment? The why, is it necessary to fund the new highway equipment to service the citizens? Administration and ops is the how. How will we plow the roads? When will we start repairs? Where will we fill potholes? Now, this isn't intended to mean that if someone from your district calls and says, "Hey, the county road isn't plowed yet, it's been 4 hours, and normally it's plowed in 2, for you to just say, "Well, okay, sorry, I can't help you. I know I'm the supervisor, but that's the staff's job." It's certainly appropriate for you to call the public works director and say, "Hey, I got this inquiry from one of my citizens. What's going on?" And he'll either say, "Wow, I didn't know that. I'll check into it." Or more likely, given your public works director, he'll already know about it and can explain to you what's going on and why. So that's kind of the difference between the policy side, administrative, and operation side. So the policy is related to your overall mission and purpose. I understand that you did not have a strategic plan. So this is the point in my presentation where I always encourage local governments that I'm talking with to develop a strategic plan, basically a 3 to 5 year look out into the future about where the county is and where it should be going in your opinion. The strategic plan, in my mind, should also involve the citizens, key business leaders within the community, nonprofits. In other words, your entire county, as they wish to be involved, so that you get a great vision moving forward that then helps you make and justify the harder budget decisions that, when it comes budget time, there's always tough budget decisions. But if the community through the strategic planning process has said X is important to us more so than Y, then you've got a good justification for spending more money on X than Y because you've got a consensus from the community. So that's a good reason to do a strategic plan. Also, if you have a comprehensive plan, it also has some recommendations. How many of you have read your comprehensive plan? Okay, a couple, great. When I give presentations to both towns and counties, the towns was the most interesting. When I first ask people if they know they have a comprehensive plan, about half the room raises their hand. It always makes me wonder what the other half of the room is doing. Then I say, "How many of you read the comprehensive plan?" A number of hands go down, a few is left raising. And then I said, "How many of you have funded the implementation within your comprehensive plan in your annual budget?" And usually there's one hand left. But there was one location last fall where almost everybody in the room raised their hand, which was quite a surprise to me. But if you haven't looked at your comprehensive plan, or as you're developing your budget for 2024, highly recommend you look at those implementation approaches and ask yourself, if these were important enough to put in the comprehensive plan, should we not be funding some of these things? And the comprehensive plan would also, if you develop a strategic plan, help inform the strategic plan. And as I mentioned a few times already, but I already told you the stories why that is. Being county board supervisor requires vision. You've got a lot of today's problems, right, that need immediate today's solutions. But but you've got a staff to help figure out some of those things. What you need to be thinking about is where does the county need to be 3 years, 5 years down the road, and how are we going to get there? And that, of course, means addressing key issues and strategy development. Whereas the staff is focused on implementing your policies and your strategies. They think short term, right? What are we going to get done today? What are we going to get done tomorrow? They're focused on the day-to-day operations. And while it says related to smaller functions, smaller is not intended to mean less important. It just means that they're not focused on a bigger picture. They've got each of your departments has specific functions and they're focused on getting those functions done. They require attention to detail. And most importantly, you've hired a quality staff, an experienced and educated staff who have the specialized training to perform the functions of that department. That's why you've hired them. So it's not to say that you shouldn't question why they're doing things in certain ways, but it is to say to respect the fact that you've got professionals working here for the county that do a pretty great job. And I was very surprised this morning when I talked to the staff, and I basically gave them the same presentation of the longevity of a lot of your staff. That's pretty unusual. A lot of counties, especially towns, cities, villages that I work with, the staff turnover is pretty fantastic. And your staff turnover here has been very minimal. So you should feel blessed about that. But I also think that says something about how you work with your staff and make sure that you're not, what I would say, micromanaging a lot of what they're doing. So to sum up, policymaking equals the ends. Administration is the means. So you're focused on where do we want to get to? What's our end game here? And the administration is focused on, all right, county board, here's how we're going to get to the ends you've prescribed. Sarah Diedrich Kastorf came up with this slide. I made one slight addition to it, but the Packers have a board of directors. The board represents the shareholders. You don't see the board members on the sidelines calling plays, and you don't see them in the huddle actually executing plays because they're focused on the big vision, the shareholders, just like you are focused on the big vision. Where's the county need to be? How do we better serve our citizens 3 to 5 years out? Just as an aside, I normally don't admit this to people this far into Wisconsin, but I'm actually a Bears fan because I grew up in Illinois. But my daughter, my wife, two of my daughters, my wife and my granddaughter are all Green Bay shareholders because they all happen to be at when the Packers had the different stock offerings back starting in '87, then they had 2 or 3 cents. And each time I was able to get my firstborn daughter, she grew up in Minnesota, but was a Packers fan from the time she could start speaking. I've never understood that, but there we are. So just think in terms of, this illustration helps, but again, what's your focus here? It's the vision, your visionaries. So can we put the video on? So what this video is of I think it's the village, but it might be the city of Carpentersville, Illinois. And since you record and live stream your board meetings, this might be of interest to you in terms of a great example of a board meeting not going so well. And then when we get done watching the video, it'll take about 10 minutes, but believe me, it'll go by fast because you won't believe all the things that are happening. We'll just have a quick conversation about how some of the things in that meeting that could have or should have gone better. Should be able just to control click. Did we break it earlier? It's 18.
This is why we don't let Barry miss any.
I actually was envious this morning because he got it to work immediately, and I've had a lot of challenges trying to embed videos in presentations. So they're trying to replace an alder on the city council.
Yes.
All right, I think we're good. So whenever you're in the midst of a heated conversation within this group, and I'm sure there'll be one or two down the road, remember this video and just ask yourself, maybe I should think a little bit further before I talk, because this, I don't remember how many views this had, but I think it was in the millions. And this is one of, I think, 6 or 7 videos like this from that same governing body. So a couple interesting things. First of all, they had no second, right? Had this been in Wisconsin, if one of you had made the chair had asked for a motion, one of you had made the motion, the chair could have seconded the motion. Now, at that point, it would have been appropriate for the chair, well, depending on whether the chair wanted to speak to the motion or not, chair may have decided it'd be appropriate to step down during that discussion, but the chair could have seconded. So apparently Illinois doesn't allow that. But if a motion doesn't receive a second, it's dead. You don't need to do anything else. You don't need to have a motion to move forward. So the advice that was given about the motion to move forward was totally erroneous, because if a motion doesn't have a second, it's like it never happened. So the chair should have just moved forward. Going back to just how these things take off, the one trustee talked about emails and letters from across the country. Well, that's why, because a couple people saw this video, they put it on social media, and pretty soon it just blew up to where people all over the country is watching it. And then when the question was called, which is basically when you call the question, yes, it means you don't debate anymore, but calling the question by itself doesn't mean you vote. Calling the question is a motion like any other motion, still requires a second. So the fact, did you hear anybody second to call the question? No, because nobody did. So that's why when you call the question, that by itself does not end debate. And a lot of folks think it does. All you have to do is call the question and you go right to a vote. Still needs a second. So, and then of course the hand raising and the signs at the end from the audience, I thought was kind of fun. So I basically show this, one, because it's kind of entertaining, but two, it's a great example of how media can go south pretty fast. Emotions can take over. So, and it's also a good example of very poor parliamentary procedure. So that's my introduction to talk about meetings. So at the meeting, and this graphic or meme, I'm not sure what we call these things anymore. And especially for some of you newer board members, or this might be helpful. It's basically questions a critical thinker should ask. So as you're looking at an issue and how you might vote or think about the issue, think about what's happening, why it's important, what is it you don't know or you don't see, how do you know the information you have is in fact good information? Who is saying that? That's a way to know whether it's good information. So for example, if it's coming from UW-Madison, it's likely pretty good information. If it's coming from Joe Blow's blog, maybe good information, maybe not. And what are some alternatives? What are some other ways to look at the issue? So at the meeting, all of you should be representing the community, and all of you also have a district to represent. But if it comes push to shove between what your district wants and what's best for the overall county, think hard about knowing what's best for the overall county in terms of your district's interests. Because you're here to represent both, because you're a county supervisor, not a district supervisor. So keep that. I do a lot of training with clerks on meetings, and their first and number one complaint, because I always survey them to ask, is what's the biggest problem you have with your elected officials? And showing up on time is always number one. Not being prepared is always number 2. You should contribute as appropriate, but respect each other's opinions and comments. You may not like what your other county board supervisor is saying. You may think it's the dumbest, stupidest thing you've ever heard in your life, but they come by their opinions like you do, honestly. So keep that in mind, and we'll talk a little bit later about listening. No sidebar discussions. So as you're having debate or discussing an issue, you should not lean over and say to your neighbor on either side, one side or the other, or both sides, some side comment or some other comment, or even talk about the weather because you're bored. Stay focused on the conversation. And you should always address your comments, whatever they are, to the chair. So if you are taking one side of an issue and another supervisor is taking another side of an issue, it's very easy to start talking back and forth to one another. You should always address your comments to the chair. And if you start talking back and forth to one another, don't be surprised if the chair says, stop, address your comments to me directly. Do not debate with each other. Very important, focus on the current topic, not last week's vote or an issue. I was contacted by an administrator for a village. I went to the village board meeting. It started at 6 p.m. And at 1:30 in the morning, it wrapped up. And we're not talking about a 5-page agenda here. We're talking about a 1.5-page agenda. But every time an issue came before the village board, 2 of the trustees, one in particular, all he wanted to talk about was the stupid mistake the staff made on a budget from 2 years previously. And he was convinced any numbers out of the staff from that point forward had to be incorrect because they made this one mistake. And the mistake was actually a transposition error, not a error of judgment. They transposed 2 numbers. And then the other supervisor, about 9:30, 10 o'clock, got up and just started wandering around the room. Now, the other interesting thing about this village board meeting was there was 30 people in the audience. There were people from neighboring communities there because they wanted to have a presentation about how to work together. All of that got delayed till like 11 o'clock at night because of all this other histrionics that was going on. So that's a long-winded way of stay focused on the current agenda. If you're mad about something that happened last week, don't, find a time to talk about with the chair, find a time to talk about with the administrator. But unless you're mad about it and want to reconsider it, and if you voted in the majority, either more for or against the item, you could bring a motion to reconsider. Voting. And we'll talk about listen and understand. That's why I skipped it, but we'll talk a little bit further. You were elected to make decisions. You were elected to help develop policies, create a vision for the county. That requires a vote. Now, there is a federal court case. City of Madison had a rule that you had to vote. And one city council member decided that he couldn't vote on a matter, so he abstained. And the city council censured that person for not voting. He went to federal court, and the court said, just because you're a council member doesn't mean you lose your First Amendment rights. And under the First Amendment, you can either talk about something or not, right? The First Amendment gives you the right to do either. So the court concluded that by not voting, his free speech and was being censured for it. His free speech rights were violated, and so they vacated the censure. And then he lost the next election. So unless it's a conflict of interest, or you're truly conflicted with the choices in front of you, in which case I would say have more discussion to get to better choices. Keep in mind your voters voted you folks to make decisions. And then all of you have Microsoft pads or whatever they're called, but stay off your personal electronic devices. There's a couple good reasons for that. One is if you're texting one of your other board supervisors because you think something weird, dumb is going on, or you're bored to death, or whatever the reason is, If enough of you join that conversation, that could be an open meeting law violation, and you'll all look pretty bad for doing that. And then, of course, the other reason is not to be getting phone calls and texts from other people. Stay focused on the meeting. So some decorum rules for elected officials. There are decorum rules in your rules and bylaws, but they're not really focused on these topics. So that's why I decided to go over them. First and foremost, stay on the agenda. I was at a different village meeting where they were on agenda item 2, and one of the village trustees really wanted to talk about agenda item 6. So he raised his hand and said, Mr. President, regarding item number 6, yada, yada. And the president said, I'm sorry, we're on agenda item 2. Wait till we get to agenda item 6. And then he literally stood up and said, okay, but when we get to agenda item 6, here's what I'm going to say. So stay on the agenda. Again, clerks I have trained and have given me their input. Basically say the next big problem they have with their elected body is they don't stay on the agenda. They're wandering all over the place. Obviously, confine your remarks to the pending issue. We talked about that. Staying on topic. If you make a motion and you realize from the discussion that that was kind of a dumb motion, we've all been there. And so, maybe you're not so excited about the motion you made. The correct procedure is to either amend the motion with something different that is better, or to make a motion to end debate on the motion, which then kills it. But don't speak against your own motion. One, it makes you look kind of like, where's your credibility? Also avoid negative motions. So let's say one of you makes a motion not to send the chair to the Counties Association annual conference. So if it passes, what happens? The chair doesn't go, right? But if it doesn't pass, what happens? Does the chair get to go now because the motion didn't pass? So that's an example of a negative motion. So a better motion would have been, I move to send the chair to the WC annual meeting. If it passes, it's clear the chair goes. If it doesn't pass, it's clear the chair doesn't go. So when you're constructing your motions, make sure that the result is a positive action. And if you're a little confused about how that might work, you've got a terrific corporation counsel here who could probably help you construct your motions. Or probably not.
Definitely.
Also, refrain from actions that disturb the assembly. And that's where you're making snide remarks. You're calling into question the fact that your wife is sleeping with the convict's wife, I think is what he said. Wow. So disturbing the assembly is basically going outside decorum. And then I always say, I've got the wrong one. Here we go. If all of you follow the golden rule, you give the same respect to others that you expect others to give you, you'll never have an issue with any of these things. And again, here's the references to your bylaws. So communication starts with listening. I first saw this quote in an Alan Alda book. He's written a terrific book about helping. He actually has a center up in with the university in New York State that is focused on helping scientists better communicate their scientific findings to the public in language the general public can understand. And in his book, he wrote, the biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it's taken place. And we all start with that assumption, don't we? We say something to somebody else and we assume they understood what they told us, but they may not have. And my example is, I'll say something to my wife thinking she understood, and she's thinking about something else and either half heard what I said. Did I say my wife says something to me and I may have half heard what I said. I got the thing backwards for some reason. So don't assume that communication's taken place, and I'll show you some ways to avoid that assumption. This is my favorite. The biggest problem with communication is we do not listen to understand, we listen to reply. And how many times if someone's been talking to you, you heard the first 3 words out of their mouth, and now you're formulating your reply. And therefore, you're not listening to anything else that they're trying to tell you. And the rest of what they were trying to tell you that you're not listening to anymore because you're figuring out how you're going to counter whatever it is they're saying may have helped explain why they're saying what they're saying. So focus on listening to understand and less on listening to reply. So thinking versus speaking is making sure that people understand what you say. And this research I thought was fascinating. We can think up to 4,000 words a minute. That boggled my mind, but apparently it's true. But in most cases, we can only speak 125 words a minute. And if we speak faster than that, nobody's going to understand anything we said. So as you're formulating your viewpoint and how you want to express your viewpoint on any issue, think about the fact you're going to think about more things than you can actually say. And so think more about the topic and what it is precisely you want to say, and choose your words carefully, and that will help you be more effective in presenting your position on any issue. And see this little spot right here? That's the nexus between everything you're thinking, what you would wanted to say, and what you actually said. So you can see it's pretty small. So don't miss an opportunity for people to understand you. Choose your words carefully. Also listen with your eyes, ears, and feelings. I love this one. Listen more than you talk. You already know everything you've got to say. So active listening, pay attention. Give the speaker your undivided attention and acknowledge the message. So I've actually tried this out with my wife, and it works, Gary. She'll come in the living room. I'm watching something on TV, and she'll just start talking. And I said, hold on. I either put the TV on mute or I pause or whatever I'm doing. I actually physically turned to her and I said, okay, what is it you're trying to tell me? And then she'll tell me. Then I say back to her, okay, I think I hear this, you saying this. That sounds a little stupid, right? You've got to repeat what your wife just told you right back to her. But sometimes earlier I mentioned you can't, you don't always hear everything they're saying because you're listening to respond. This is a way to make sure that you actually heard what the other person is saying. So while it seems like it might be a little silly or redundant, it actually helps the other person understand that you did hear what they had to say. It doesn't mean you agreed with it, just means you understood what they were saying. Provide some feedback. I always defer judgment till you get to the point where you have to provide judgment, and then respond appropriately. And I'm still working on the respond appropriately part. Also, don't assume that the person's starting in a certain place with whatever it is their comment is. Listen to what they have to say, not to your own assumptions. Watch their body language. And as I mentioned before, really pay attention to your feelings. Try to react and I'm not going to say a rational way because I'm not sure anybody understands what rational is anymore, but more of a way of understanding that your feelings aren't driving your comments. You're not responding in anger or in happiness. So why do you have these rules and bylaws? And the reason you have them is to facilitate a decision made by the majority. You don't want a minority of supervisors blocking decisions that the majority of supervisors think are important to make. So the reason you have meeting procedure rules, the whole reason behind Robert's Rules of Order is to facilitate a decision made by the majority, but also provide the ability for all views to be heard and provide an orderly way to disagree without being disagreeable. It sets expectations for the meeting process and conduct. And sources of meeting rules, statutes are pretty basic. It basically says you got to record a second and you got to notice your meetings, but there's precious little about how to run a meeting in the statutes. So that's why you have local rules and bylaws. And there's lots of options for creating meeting rules, Robert's Rules of Order being the most popular. Your bylaws refer to Robert's rules as being binding where your rules don't already address the topic. And This one I like your public series. Just reading the minutes back. There's a guy named Roger Fisher, and his couple of co-writers, William Ury and Bruce Patton, who wrote a great book, Getting to Yes, Negotiating Agreement Without Giving In. I'm not sure about the without giving in part, but it's a great book. And they basically, the premise of the book is everyone's got a position about something. And what's important is to understand what are the interests that support the position. So in this case, I don't want the county to adopt a zoning ordinance. Why? Because I want to be able to do what I want with my land. That's the interest. Once you understand the interest, now you can start having a discussion about the interest. Okay, so if you don't want anybody telling you what to do with your land, what about your neighbor? You know, if we don't have zoning rules, you don't have to comply with anything, but neither does your neighbor. So now your neighbor can build a solar farm in his backyard, or now your neighbor can put a mini nuclear generating plant in their backyard. Is that what you want? So now you can start having a rational discussion about the interest, because you understand what's the interest, not the position, which is, I don't want the zoning ordinance. So when you're having discussions with each other, everybody's got a position, but try to get behind what's supporting that position. And then I think you'll have a lot better, more fruitful discussions about your interests and their interests and how those interests might be able to merge. And this is a good, and I'll just have you folks look at this later. This is also from the book, but it does a great job of sort of sorting out how to get to yes in a discussion with another person. So what about your citizens? So your rules grant citizens the right to speak if noticed on the agenda. They get 3 minutes per person, but it's not confined to the agenda. They can talk about anything they want in that 3 minutes. But there's a maximum of 15 minutes for all public participation. So the one thing I mentioned to the staff this morning that I think you should consider is that 15 minutes. I think 3 minutes is a great time frame. If they can't say what they need to say in 3 minutes, then there's something wrong with their arguments. But a maximum of 15 minutes, if you got a very controversial issue, 15 minutes is 5 people. You might have 50 people in the room all upset about something. So a couple ways to deal with that. One is you could suspend your rules. So only for that meeting, only for that topic, you would suspend the rules and allow a longer maximum time. And the chair could also make sure that people don't start repeating themselves, because that's, you might have 50 people in the room, but only 7 have something original to say. I was the planning commission chair for the town of Burke, where I live. And whenever we have conditional use permits or zoning changes, get 20 or 30 people in a room, 5 people had something new to say. The rest of the people in the room basically just wanted to confirm the position of the others. So what I would say to them is, do you have anything new to say? They said, no. I said, but you want us to understand that you support what the others have said? They say, yes. So that did 2 things. One is I didn't have to hear it again, but more importantly, they felt like we understood that they felt strongly about the issue. So that's a way to deal with that. If they talk about something that's not on the agenda, then what you folks should do, and nothing more, is if there's a clarifying comment. So if someone's upset about the Public Works Department and the way they're plowing the street, a clarifying comment is, you live on County Road X at mile marker or fire marker X, right? That just tells you where the problem was. It doesn't commit you to agreeing or disagreeing with their approach. And very important, take no action. But if you think action is necessary, there's a couple ways to do that. One is you could just ask the chair to ask the appropriate committee to look at the issue and bring it back. You could ask the chair to talk to the department head about the issue. What you don't want to do is start having a discussion about how to fix the problem primarily because it's not on the agenda and you would have an open meetings law violation if you start discussing the item. One thing you may want to consider in your rules is a limitation speaking to only agenda items, because now you can then, if it's on the agenda and they're talking about it, you can ask more than clarifying questions. You can have a discussion. The other side of that coin is a citizen, you may never have something on your agenda where the citizen wants to talk about. So by limiting to agenda items, you limit the citizen's ability to come forward and talk about whatever's important to them. Decorum, your rules don't really speak to public comment decorum, but they should have the same decorum rules you all have, which is no bad words, no calling people names, no impugning people's integrity. There's a great video from Kenosha County. If you go to YouTube, type in Kenosha County, where I think it's Kenosha, yeah, where a person was speaking, started calling the board terrible names. The board chair admonished the person, basically said if he keeps it up, he's going to be invited to leave. The person got more invictive, if that's possible. And then 2 deputy sheriffs came and literally picked him up and hauled him out of the room. And that created a lot of controversy, but it was the right thing to do. But having some decorum rules help make the chair's job easier to maintain order. And then again, as I mentioned, the time limit might be dependent on the agenda item. So there's 2 ways you can deal with that. One is take the time limit out, which I'm not suggesting. I think the better approach is to agree as a body that you'll suspend the rules for that one item. Or if your public comments typically at beginning meetings,
What's that?
your
Yes,
public
yeah, it's
comment.
the beginning.
So you might just extend the public comment period for that.
Could I ask you a question real
Yes,
quick there,
absolutely.
Daniel? So often, and I mean, we have had times where a board member will ask for clarification on something. But so often in a public comment like that, people are speaking about other things than what are on the agenda, something that's happening to them personally, and they're very nervous usually. And usually when they're up there, or many times when they're up there, they'll ask us a question. So answering them in any way, is that a violation of?
I think that's where it gets down to what your answer is.
Mhm.
So if the question is, well, how come you guys never do anything about this? Then the answer could be, we'll look at it. We'll talk to the administrator. We'll talk to the department head. We'll refer it to a committee, something that indicates that you're going to at least look at it, but doesn't commit anybody to any action, and doesn't gather any more information, doesn't gather any additional information. Sometimes just having the person speak to the department head as the immediate solution helps a lot, because then the department head can report back either through the administrator or through the committee. This person had this issue. Here's what we talked about. Here's my suggested resolution. Or this person had this issue. We talked about it and there's no issue.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep, that's right. A lot of times the people just say, do you think that's fair or something like that? But that would be
Yeah.
a very good place to say.
Yeah.
Yep.
And if the other thing is, a lot of times they don't understand the open meeting law requirements. So sometimes just, we're not ignoring you. We're hearing what you're saying, but it's not on this week's agenda. You just brought it up. That's why we have a process to deal with it, and I'm going to start the process.
Okay. Yep, very good. Thank you.
Other questions on that? Okay, good. I got the thumbs up from the Corporation Council. I must have done good. All right, so here's your bylaws. And we've talked about the bylaws a few times. But again, if you haven't read the bylaws, especially as to your meeting procedures, agenda procedures, et cetera, that tells you how all that stuff gets done. And if you're not happy with it, then it's up to you to talk to the Corporation Council about suggested changes that then this board would have to approve. So I love this quote from John Kenneth Galbraith. Anybody know who John Kenneth is? You all are about the similar age to me, so you should know who he is. He was a liberal economist. and a proponent of John Maynard Keynes, who was the liberal economist. So he said meetings are indispensable when you don't want to do anything. Hopefully we don't have any like that. So a meeting is defined by the statutes. It's a gathering of members of a governmental body for purposes of exercising their responsibilities. That's the statutory definition of a meeting. And as you can see, it's pretty expansive. Pretty much covers the gathering, exercising responsibilities. So it's pretty straightforward. So the intent of the open meeting law is to ensure public access. In other words, all the business of the county is done in an open decision-making forum, and that includes information gathering. In other words, you're trying to find out about the issue. That includes all of your discussion about the issue and certainly your voting. And the way that happens is through advance notice of meetings. That's why you have meeting notices for all of your meetings. So for example, if you've got a board meeting and 3 committee meetings happening in the same day, that's 4 notices, not 1 notice with 4 items on it. And that the meetings are open and accessible to public. We'll talk about accessibility a little bit later. And there are limited closed sessions that are ruled by statute. So you have to meet the statutory definition to go into closed session. So who's subject? Local governing bodies of general and special purpose. You are a local governing body of general purpose. So you folks are obviously subject to the open meetings law. Any committees you set up, commissions or boards, if you set up a special task force to deal with a particularly thorny issue, that's covered by the open meetings law because it's a function of you folks setting it up. If the Chamber of Commerce decides they're going to set up a task force to talk about solutions to a particularly thorny issue, they invite 1 or 2 of you to serve on that group or some of your staff. They are not subject to open meetings law because they is not something you set up. It is something a group that isn't subject to the open meeting law set up. However, here we go. If you have citizen members on your committees, commissions, boards, special task force, whatever they are also covered by the open meetings law. And a lot of times citizen member says, well, I'm not elected, I'm not covered. But if you've appointed to a commission, committee, or board, or special task force, whatever it is that you folks have set up, they're covered just like any other member of that committee, commission, special task force. And that includes staff members if they are appointed to serve on that group. If they're serving ex officio, if they're serving as support, then they're not covered. So there's 2 tests. Yes, sir. Lake associations are covered as special units of government. So they are also covered by the open meetings law. There are 2 tests to a meeting. The first test is, are there enough members of body are present to determine an outcome of an action? So typically, if I'm talking to county boards, not you folks, but a lot of county boards are big, right? 21, 27, 35, I think one's 41, the largest one in the state, something like that. So the likelihood that you're talking to a majority of people is possible, but not likely. But yours is 11, so that means 6, right? So if 6 of you gather together, I was thinking of that wedding song, whenever 2 or more of you, but in this case, it's whenever 6 or more of you. So you need to be careful. Now, your committees are what, 3 to 5 people? So that's where the violation potentially happens. So these 3 are on the Public Works Committee. Oh, I already used them, didn't I? These 3 are on the Human Services Committee, and they're down at the diner having breakfast. So are there enough members of this Human Services Committee present to determine an outcome of an action? It's a 3-member committee. There's 3 members there. Answer is yes, correct? Then you look at the purpose test. Were they discussing, information gathering, or decision-making on a matter coming within the jurisdiction of the Human Services Committee? And here they're talking about golf. They're talking about their golf games and why they play such lousy golf. They are not talking about any human services matters or other matters before the county board. So even though the numbers test is met, the purpose test is not. So if the numbers test is met, there's a presumption that a meeting occurred. And then if it's occurred, then you can rebut the presumption by basically stating, all we did was talk about golf. All we did was talk about the weather. We did not discuss any county business in any way, shape, or form. Now, because there's 3 members of that committee, and let's start with a 5-member committee. Do they have any 5-member committees?
Mhm.
Okay, 5 members of the committee, 2 people are in the restaurant, and they are talking about committee business. Do they meet the numbers test? The answer is maybe. If they know that 2 other members of the committee aren't going to be at the next committee meeting, now you've got a body of 3, and 2 can certainly influence either negatively or positively the outcome of that meeting. It's called a negative quorum. And so when I give presentations, I basically tell folks, especially with smaller committees, it's just not worth the hassle of having 2 people discussing committee business unless you're pretty positive that all the committee members are going to show up, and you never really know that for sure. So I think it's better to follow the intent of the law, which is do all your business in public. Now, I've had a lot of people look at me and say, well, we can't operate like that. And I've said, well, why'd you run for the board then? Because that's what the law requires. So here's a little quiz, and we're going to raise hands in a minute. So we got 3 members we were already talking about. Here we've got the entire county board at an event. And here we've got 1 member of the county board at an event. So basically A, B, and C. So is there an open meetings law violation with A? That's the 3 people put together. With B, that's the entire board at an event. C, just 1 person there. D, yes, all pictures. E, nope, none of the pictures are violations. Or F, need more information. So how many people think A? How many people think B? How many people think C? How many people think D or F? F is the correct answer. You need more information, right? You might have the numbers test met, but you don't know what they're talking about. And until you know what they're talking about, you don't have a potential violation of the open meetings law. And I do this questions a lot. And I think you're the first group I've talked to in a very long time where nobody raised their hand for A or for B or C. So thank you. All right, so here we have walking quorum. As you can see, I've got my bullet dots out of thing. I love this meme because it says, all in favor of what we discussed at the email thread at Larry's son's birthday party, say aye. Not that that's ever happened here. So a walking quorum is basically where you intend to circumvent the law, not by meeting with a potential quorum, but one-on-one. So one of you decides to talk to 5 or 6 of you about their views of a particular issue, what they found out about a particular issue, or to secure their votes on a particular issue, but they do it one by one, so they never have an issue with the open meetings law as far as getting 6 or more of you together in a room at the same time. But they do it one-on-one. And that can be done through emails, texts, Facebook page. Doesn't matter what the forum is, it's the result. So that can be lining up votes, gathering information, trying to get an agreement, or trying to get you to kind of wink an eye that you'll agree. So walking quorums are very dangerous because for a lot of issues, no one's going to care. But it's always that one issue where there's going to be a big stink somebody finds out that one of you talked to 6 or 7 or all of you individually about the issue, now all of a sudden you've got a potential open meetings law violation. And more importantly, whatever you decided at the meeting would be voided because of the open meetings law violation that occurred. So walking quorum issues are very complex and fact specific. But if you remember the fact that if you talk about county business with another county board supervisor, take care not to do it with other county board supervisors. And at the committee level, I suggest never doing it because you've got such small committees. And again, remember, it doesn't matter the form that you use for the conversation, the fact you had the conversation, even if it's just with Facebook posts. Another thing is important to remember is you get a communication from the clerk or the administrator. And so your natural reaction is to reply all and respond. Never reply all to any communication about county board business because you then may have created a walking quorum. So the best thing to do is either talk directly to the department head or the clerk or the administrator about your views on the issue. And why is it not a violation to talk to the administrator, the department head, or the clerk? Because they're not covered by the open meetings law unless they're specially appointed to one of the committees, commissions, task force, et cetera. So you can have a conversation with them all day long about your views on the issue. They could have a conversation with the rest of you about your views on the issue. But whether that gets up to the walking quorum issue or not is a great question for your corporation counsel to answer. She hasn't hit me yet, so that's good. Okay. We're going to talk a little bit about the agenda. Here's where it's discussed in your bylaws. So the agenda, every meeting shall be preceded by a public notice. There must be a separate notice for each meeting. We talked about that before. If you've got 2 committees in the same day, it can't be on the same notice. It needs to be 2 different notices. It has to be reasonably approximate to the time and date of the meeting. So your website, I believe, publishes all of your board meetings for the year, right? Is that notice? No, because it doesn't say what you're going to talk about at the meeting. It just says when the meeting's going to be. So a member of the public wouldn't know if they need to attend or not because they may not care about what's on your agenda, but next month's agenda, they may care very much. The only exception to the notice requirement is if the board is discussing an agenda item at a meeting and decides the best thing to do is have a specific committee talk about that item after the meeting, but the same night in the same place. That doesn't require a notice because the public's already got notice that that's going to be discussed. They're just going to have to sit around for a little while longer to hear what the discussion is. And again, here's the bylaws, the sections refer to it. So the public notice has a date, time, place, and subject matter. So I took one of your notices. I used to use one from St. Croix Falls up in Minnesota border, but I decided I would change up. Your clerk here has done a wonderful job. This is the most complete date, time, place I've ever seen on a notice. Not only says what door to enter in, but very explicit discussion, information on how to tie in through the public feed. And also if anybody's got questions to contact the clerk. So great information. You folks have a lot of reports on your agendas. And my suggestion is do not take any action on any report, just receive the report. Used to be a lot of folks would just say, well, we've accepted the report or we've approved the report. The problem with that is unless you've read the report, how do you know what's in it? Tell the truth, guys. Do many of you read the reports entirely? You might look for a couple sections, maybe you read them all, but as a practical matter, unless you've read the report, you know exactly what's in it, it's best to receive it because then you've taken no action other than to say, thank you. We're going to look at that information. if there is something in that report that does need specific board action, then the agenda should say so. That way a citizen's not guessing about and having to read a whole bunch of reports trying to figure out what the heck is going on.
Sorry. In presentations. Something that
Okay. So that's great practice. So where most agendas get problematic is the subject matter. And it has to apprise the public of what's to be addressed. Only notice agenda items can be discussed. It has to be specific so the public knows what's going to be discussed. It doesn't grant the right or citizens the right to participate, only your rules grant that. But you can include public comment period, which your agendas typically do. So here you've got some subject matter. And this is hard to read, but you had a resolution supporting Washera Shines. Now on your electronic agendas, it's posted on the website. All the detail for the agenda is with, the backup is with the agenda. So it gives anybody who wants to know it plenty of information. But the agenda that's posted here at the courthouse, as I understand it, doesn't have all that backup. So you might want to consider either tagging that backup to the agenda so someone can leaf through if they want to find out, or have a little more description in here about what the agenda is. This is a great descriptor right here. So, because it makes it really clear what's being discussed. And I highlighted this to show my wife how important I am because I'm speaking at your next meeting. So the agenda has to be published at least 24 hours in advance. There is a 2-hour advance notice for good cause. Typically, that might be a weather-related event where a county road or bridge is washed out and you need to add an agenda item so you can get it fixed or dealt with, spend more money, whatever it is. However, if you forget to ask the chair or the clerk to put something on the agenda, that's not good cause. So good cause means an important reason why you're doing that short notice. It is not because you just forgot. That's not good cause. So there are 3 options to posting. You folks use the second one, which is basically posting on the website and in one public place here at the courthouse. It used to be you had to post in 3 public places. And I would always have a big discussion about whether a bar is a public place. And all you have to show is that, and actually you could post a 1 notice at a bar if you reasonably believe that most of the county would see that in the bar. And there's a lot of places, especially towns, where the bar is probably going to get better attendance than other places. Grocery store is another popular one. So whose job is it to post the notice? There's your clerk. Well, not your clerk, but a clerk. But it's not the clerk's job. It's the chief presiding officer. All of you are chairs of a committee, or for those of you who are chairs of the committee, publishing the notice is your responsibility. Then you say, what? The clerk always does it. Well, that's because you designate the clerk. Or if you're a committee, you might designate your department head or staff member to do this. But at the end of the day, if the notice is wrong, if there's some screw up with the notice, it's not the clerk's fault. It's your fault because you're the chief presiding officer of the committee and or the board. So take that responsibility seriously, look at the agenda, make sure it reads the way it's supposed to. Public access. The open meetings law actually predates the Americans with Disability law, which when you think about it is pretty amazing. So you have to have reasonable access here. If you meet here, it's pretty easy. If you've got elevators, there's lots of ways for people to get around with disabilities.
quick question about the materials that go with the agenda. Are those materials be on the website or the posting before not everything's always sent out by every of the committees. The county board we have everything, but with the committees, are all the materials that are gonna be used to be posted?
If you look at the agenda and it's a little vague as to what is going to be discussed and you're relying on those supporting materials to help fill out that discussion or that information, then yes. If the agenda item's pretty clear, we're going to discuss fixing the road at fire marker X to Y, then if I'm living on that road, I've got plenty of notice that that's being discussed by the committee. And if it's important to me, I know enough to show up.
So if I were gonna be, talking about ARPA dollars, allocating ARPA dollars, for instance, and I didn't have the supporting, it should say for what with the amounts and, or would it just be?
Well, if you just, I mean, a lot of agenda, I've seen this a lot, especially with ARPA dollars. We're going to update our ARPA dollar discussion, or we're going to, decide to spend the remaining ARPA dollars. But the agenda doesn't say what for, so that's not specific. So you really need some specificity. Now, if you expect that $10,000 is going to be approved for an item, you could say, the agenda item could say to support XYZ to the tune of $10,000, or you could just say to support X, Y, and Z, some to be determined at the meeting. Either way, that gives somebody who cares about X, Y, and Z, good or bad, notice that that's going to be discussed as a funding item.
And so some of the committees get the packet ahead of time. It's not posted, but if the materials are available, should be posting it with the notice right on the.
Yeah, yes, I think so. But it also needs to be posted in the public, the physical posting you're doing. Or the agenda item needs to be clear and specific enough so somebody reading understands this is going to be discussed with or without the supporting materials.
Some of our packets are like 70-some pages, so would it be specific enough to say, see the clerk if you need a printed copy?
If the agenda item is clear as to what's going to be discussed, yeah, that would be appropriate. But I mean, with electronic postings, the electronics isn't usually the issue. It's the wall one. So, but I've seen some places basically put things in 3-ring binders that got a chain attached so the stuff doesn't wander away. There's lots of ways to do it. I think the simplest is just spend the time, put a little extra verbiage so it's clear what's on the agenda, what the agenda item is going to cover. And then you don't need to have to worry about whether you got all the right supporting documentation. And then, of course, if you use a 3-ring binder, somebody doesn't like the item or supports it, might steal all the papers out of it. So there's, yeah. And then the other thing I think is kind of a rule of reason, which is the more likely it is someone's going to be upset about a specific agenda item or it's going to be controversial, the more time I would spend making sure that it is specific enough. If it's routine stuff, that likely isn't going to be an issue. So reasonable access, so they have to be able to get there. If you anticipate large crowds for controversial topics, so let's say you're talking about raising the mill rate, right? And everybody loves the mill rate and they want it to go up, right? Is this room going to be big enough to put all the people that are going to be upset about the mill rate rising? Probably not. So you may want to consider moving this meeting to a bigger room, high school gymnasium, elementary school gymnasium, because usually those are smaller. Whatever it is, try to anticipate, try to make sure your room will fit the crowd. Now, the Madison School Board did something interesting about 3 years ago. They were going through a series of controversial decisions. Well, actually, they go through controversial decisions, seems like every board meeting. But so what they did for one of them was basically put in big TVs in a gymnasium with a sound system. And they met in a small room by themselves. And then they transmitted the meeting to the bigger room where everybody was sitting. And the crowd was very upset because they wanted to see the faces of the board members, which they could, the way the cameras were set up. They just couldn't see them in person. And I kept thinking somebody would yell and scream about that approach, but other than not being happy with the decision to do that, nobody ever sued the school board over doing that. And they also allowed public comment because they had the mic set up in the room, they could turn on and off. So there's lots of creative ways you can get at dealing with controversial topics.
So your opinion on that's okay then?
Nobody ever sued the school board over that approach. And I think if you're expecting a huge crowd and their crowds would happen to be pretty unruly, this was also a safety factor for the school board. So they took this step, one, to meet the intent of the law, but also they were a little concerned about if all these people are in a room yelling and screaming and stomping, how would they get their school board business done? So to my knowledge, nobody ever challenged it. It has to be proximate to the public served. When I use St. Croix Falls agenda as my example, if they've got a big issue, they know they're going to have a bunch of people there. They decide they're going to use Target Stadium in Minneapolis, which is 60 miles away. That's probably not proximate to the public served, but a big facility across the county border, but only a couple miles away might. So these are all kind of fact-driven areas. You're allowed to go into closed session, but they are limited to those authorized by statute, which includes deliberations considering a judicial or quasi-judicial case. Those of you who are town members, I think there were in city council, your board of reviews can never go into closed session because the statute's very clear that all board of reviews are open session, but the county doesn't have board of reviews, so you don't have that issue. Personnel matters, including employee discipline and licensing, deliberations on property acquisitions and investments, competitive or collective or bargaining issues. You don't have a union here, but you might have some bargaining issues. You're trying to decide what the right compensation mix, benefit mix is for the employees. You can talk about that in closed session. Oops, I did it again. Here we go. Okay, so what are the procedures? First and foremost, you have to meet first in open session, which means the possibility of going into closed session needs to be an agenda item. And that's true for committees. So keep that in mind. Your clerk's pretty much got your regular board meetings under control. But those of you who are chairs and you're thinking about going into closed session because you're going to discuss one of the statutory permissible areas, I would definitely talk to Corporation Counsel and make sure you get it done right. You need to announce the authority, the purpose of the proposed closed session. You can close the session by recorded majority vote, which means whoever's taken the minutes should note everybody that voted yes to go into closed session and everybody that voted no. And there's a couple reasons that's important. The first reason is just so you can show you had a majority to go into closed session. The second reason is very important because if you go into closed session improperly and the county gets sued over it, if you voted no, you're off the hook. Only people that voted yes. Now you're all thinking, gosh, I'm going to vote no every time from now on. I never want to be at the hook. Well, that's not really how it works. If all of you vote in favor unanimously, the minutes should reflect that. So let's say two of you vote no. You don't think it's a good idea to go into closed session. I knew one member of a village board who thought it was never appropriate, even though the statutes gave authority, never appropriate to go in closed session, always voted no. Does that person or persons who voted no get to go in a closed session with the rest of you? The answer is yes, because they're still members of the governing body. Also, any personnel essential to the closed meeting discussion should be in the meeting. And I think it's a good idea always to have the clerk in the meeting, especially if it's a county board going into closed session, because that's the one person who, if there's a question later, can ask, was other stuff discussed during the closed session besides what you said was going to be discussed? Were any votes taken? The clerk can be the one unimpeachable source that can answer those questions because the clerk has no stake in whatever happened in the closed session. If it's a committee, the members of the parent body may remain. And you, again, only discuss what you said you were going to discuss. And you don't reconvene an open session unless your agenda, your original board agenda specifically says we're going to come back into open session and vote on whatever we discussed in closed session. So if you're talking about buying a piece of property, you could come back at open session and say, we're going to vote to proceed with purchasing this property. But if your agenda doesn't say that, then you basically you've adjourned. So a lot of elected governing bodies meet in closed session at the end of the meeting so people don't have to sit around. But depending on the topic, you may decide otherwise. So the penalties for violating the law, well, you don't go to jail, so don't worry about that. Any member, there's a $25 to $300 non-reimbursable forfeiture. That means you can't get reimbursed. So if you went into improper closed session, you've got this potential fine. The bigger problem is the attorney's fees, because that's where the real money is, right? A $300 fine is $300, but your attorney's $450 an hour, so that adds up pretty fast. Loss of public trust, personal embarrassment, even your cat's embarrassed. So I was also asked to speak a little bit about minutes. So the statute actually talks about what needs to be in minutes. And this is the most interesting language I've seen in most statutes because of all the big words they used. But an intelligible abstract or synopsis of the essential elements of an official action taken by a local governing body, including the subject matter of a motion, persons making and seconding the motion. So the statute requires you to have a second for a motion and a roll call vote on the motion. That's what the statute requires. So the minutes should focus on what you folks did, not what was said. So it should talk about announcements, talk about what's reported. It should summarize what was discussed, but does not need to be, this person said this person said that, this person said something inappropriate. It should just be the general discussion was X. What you've ordered, what commitments were made, or what decisions were made. So the motion was X. Discussion covered these areas, and the motion passed 4-2. And if there was a roll call vote, then list who voted for and against the motion. When you record the formal decisions, first and foremost, the exact wording of all motions is very important. So if you're in a committee meeting especially, and the staff person taking the minutes or the committee member taking the minutes, very important that they get all motions recorded exactly as stated. So I've seen a lot of meetings where there's all this discussion going around the room and finally somebody says, I liked what he said, I moved that. What is it what he said? And what is it to move that, right? So if you liked what the person said, a way to deal with that is to say, I really like that. Could you repeat that so I can make that a motion? That way the motion gets recorded. And again, the motion, the person making the motion and the person seconding has to be listed. So that's one of the few areas where state law actually tells you how to run a meeting. You've got to have a person making and seconding the motion listed. If the decision's unanimous consent, the minutes should reflect it. It should show a distribution of the counted votes. And if one of you go ayes and nays, the chair says the ayes have it, you're certainly welcome to say, I'd like a recorded vote, which means all of you have to vote orally by, by the way you'll get a roll call vote and you'll just vote and that the clerk will have who voted yes and who voted no. That's one of the other few rights you have as a supervisor is to ask for a roll call vote whenever you want. And if it's a voice vote, the outcome and that the voice vote was taken, in other words, motion carried, voice vote. And again, this helps whoever's taking the minutes understand what they need to put in there, but also helps you when you're reviewing the minutes at the next meeting to say to yourself, were these things in there? Do I understand really what happened? Or is the motion he said and we all liked it, so we voted for it? So again, I think it's a good idea to record, well, for reports and announcements, that you receive the report, who gave it, and what subject matter. So there, since the reports are oral, Public Works Director gave his report, substance of which is in the document. But if the Public Works Director asks for action, unless it's on the agenda, you've got to put it off till the next meeting. Report should be on file. And again, don't vote to accept or approve. So we have a number of resources. Is it possible to get into that site? Yeah. I meant to do that this morning, but we were close to time. So this is what the local government education program site looks like. You can scroll down a little bit. So this public service recognition toolkit, one of the programs I run is the Wisconsin Certified Public Manager Program, which is a terrific program to take your up and comers, your technically astute personnel who need some executive supervisory or management training. The cohort does an individual project and they also do a class project. And this year they decided as part of Public Service Recognition Week to do a toolkit to promote service in the, to promote being in public service as an employee. So there's a lot of great toolkit ideas in there. If you may or may not want to use, feel free. So over on the right side are all the various topics. So for example, the top one, the Local Government Funding Task Force. I led a task force last year that concluded with a white paper that was used with the legislature as a basis to convince the legislature that they should fund local government better than they do. And the conclusion in the white paper and what's being discussed in the legislature right now is taking some of the existing sales tax and devoting that to local government, which in good years will give you more resources. In bad years will give you less resources. But if you look at the history of the sales tax, even in bad, over a 5 or 10 year period, it's usually on an upward plane. And I don't know any local government, there might be one or two, but I'm not aware of them that have all the resources they need from a funding standpoint. So those discussions are ongoing in the legislature, and you folks may have been approached to provide some stories, some challenges you've had here in the county to operate under the levy limits and some of the other limited options. We had some information on the ARPA in there. If you go to counties in Wisconsin, oh great, it doesn't open. There we go. So keep going down. So we have some great fact sheets on county committees, self-organized counties, some limits on board administration authority, the different forms of maps, but I've got to update that because I think that has changed some. Roles and responsibilities, and then a little bit about restricting, but we'll pass restrict. redistricting now. So, and then down below are some reports. And then if you go back to the right side there, you can see we also have information on deliberative governance, which is really a tool to get more citizen engagement in your governance efforts and be a little more deliberate about trying to get citizen engagement. And one of the things that places that have taken a deliberate governance approach have found is, I don't know if you've had challenges getting people to run for the county board here, but there's a ton of towns and some villages and cities and actually some counties where all the open seats are not, people are not filing for election. So they've got open seats after the election. They've got to figure out how to fill. Can you click on the great? Right below finance and government, yeah. Then scroll down, link to great. And then municipal type, put counties. Yeah, unclick all and then click counties, thanks. And then go to choose municipalities. And you should see we're share there. And then what's a neighboring county? Marquette, pull Marquette up. And then let's see, you should have a filter for, yeah, go to choose variable. Oh, here you could choose the different years. You want this right now, it's about a 20-year time frame, but you could choose like the last 5 years and then choose variable and then go to up, where's the income? There we go. Go revenue, general property taxes. So what this does is, in a pretty easy way to use it, shows you the average size, which is 10 to 30,000 population. You folks are like 25, something like that. The green is you folks and the blue is Marquette. So you can compare yourself against all 72 counties or all the other 71 counties. You can pick and choose what other counties. The variables have a number of expense items. There's a number of revenue items. And so it's just a real easy way to get some sense of how you're spending, how your revenues compare to your neighbors or to counties that you think are more reflective of you folks. So for example, if you thought Iowa County, which is, not close by, but not far away either, is similar to your county in terms of geographic makeup, population, et cetera, you could have chosen Iowa County to add to that mix. Also, where it says download data, you can download this information into a CSV file, which is basically an Excel file, and you could do your own what if games. So your finance director, your staff could get some pretty easy comparisons. The only challenge is because we're using Department of Revenue data, they're always 2 years behind. So the data is up through 2020, not through 2022. But it still gives you a pretty good sense of that. So this used to be, the program used to spit out an 8-page, 10-page Word document that had some graphs that compared you against similar size counties, but didn't have any of the flexibility this has. So we're really, this is a recent addition to the website. And then if you go back. So the other thing I want to point out is we have a lot of great information on community planning, land use regulation, disaster management. There's stuff in there, but I'm not sure how good it is. Some great information on effective meetings. We also have 4 videos we did on certain aspects of parliamentary procedure. How many of you been to Disneyland or Disney World and been on a small world ride? And I apologize, I put that earworm in your ear now. The only thing I'll tell you is if you watch one of the videos, we have music that's almost annoying as that small, small world. So keep that in mind. Some great information on intergovernmental cooperation. Open government covers both public records, open meetings, some great information about running for office. So if you're encouraging somebody to run for elective office, city, town, probably not this board because you have a lot of great people already, but maybe this board, there's a lot of great information about what they need to do, how they need to file, where they need to go, and how to develop a support system. So that's our website, a lot of great information. Feel free to contact me if you have any questions ever. I get a lot of questions from counties, cities, villages, towns on a variety of subjects. My focus areas are effective meetings, budget finance, and public records. But if you need some help with something else, if I can't help you, we'll get it for you. And I'm a little bit early, but yes.
You talked about the comprehensive plan in the department head meeting and here. What would your recommendation be to have this board become, and the departments, because I haven't read it in depth either, to become familiar with that? Would that be asking, ours was done by East Central Planning.
Yep.
And we're no longer a member of that. What are your thoughts there?
So,
Strategic planning,
yep. So you have to update comp plan every 10 years. I'm not sure where yours is at.
2018, or it's updated.
Okay, so it's been relatively recent in the grand scheme of things. Usually there's an executive summary at the beginning. There's like 10 pieces to the comprehensive plan. The last being the implementation piece. So I would read at a minimum the summary of each of the areas in the comprehensive plan, and that's land use, that's parks, that's roads, there's 9 areas total, I believe. And then I would also read it in its entirety, the implementation recommendations, because that's really the key to the comprehensive plan. Is if there's 3 recommendations from the park section, what are they, and what was the estimated cost in the comp plan, and does your budgeting reflect any of those recommendations? And the comp plan typically is put together by your entire county. So there's a lot of public meetings, a lot of public input. It's not something some consultant just sits down at a desk one day and says, gee, I think this and this, here's what it is. All of you should have had some input into the comp plan when it was developed back in 2018 or 2017, probably. So that's what I would do. I would read each section's kind of executive summary or a couple of opening paragraphs. So you can get some sense of where that chapter is going. And then I would review in its entirety the implementation plan, which is usually a bullet point with some discussion, a couple sentences below saying this is to affect XYZ from part 1 or part 10 or part 9 or whatever it is. And normally I ask, when I talk to towns, I ask everybody who's read it and all that kind of stuff. And it's always interesting, the response I don't get. So, in other words, few people have read it. So, but I think it's incumbent on you as supervisors to at least understand what's in there and have some sense of what the recommendations are, and ask yourself, this looks like a great recommendation. Does the budget really reflect this recommendation? And if not, should it be reflected in the budget? And there may not be money to do it, but at least you've had the consideration and the discussion. So, and that goes back to what I said earlier. If you're a parks person, you're always voting for parks funding. Well, that means something else isn't potentially getting funded. So you have to ask yourself, as you're voting on the budget and each particular piece of the budget is, yep, parks are important, law enforcement's important, public works is important. I mean, really everything you do, human services are critically important. The clerk's office is important because they do a ton of stuff. So it's not like something isn't important. It's more a matter of, have you thought about the importance of each area and how to balance the priorities, and does the budget reflect those priorities? And this is the part where someone usually stands up and shoots me, but I thank you for not doing that.
We have security at the front.
That too could work into a short-term strategic plan. I mean, just because of
Yeah.
that too. So
And a strategic planning process, I've probably done four or 500 in my years. I've done them for for nonprofits, for private businesses. I've done a number for local governments or units, or Literacy Chippewa Valley, which is kind of a quasi-governmental entity. I did one for them. So a strategic planning process can be very long and involved, can be very short and sweet. It can also just focus on a couple of key issues. So a key issue might be, we've got these 4 finance budget needs. We're trying to figure out how to deal with those, how we're going to fund those things, how we're going to balance the competing priorities. So your strategic focus could really just be in that area and not do a full-blown strategic planning effort. But if you do a strategic planning effort, I think it's really important to involve the public, your key constituents, business community, nonprofit community, your municipalities within the county. If you're involved in a multi-county agreement of some type, your partners in that endeavor. In other words, really be proactive with who you're bringing into the process. And you say to yourself, God, that's going to really be unwieldy. How are we going to get all those people to agree on stuff? You'd be surprised how quickly it happens. I've done strategic planning. I've done at least. You break the group into smaller groups. You talk about where you want to be in 3 to 5 years. You talk a little bit about some of the challenges you're currently facing, the good and the things you do good, things you could do better. And then it boils down pretty easily into 1 year. And then, of course, an implementation plan. If you do a strategic plan and don't have an implementation plan with it, then you've wasted your time. So, but I would say with the county, it's something that could be done 3 to 4 months. And in the past, I think the staff is, from what I understood this morning, has done a lot of effort on strategic planning. And I think there's at least the approach that I would recommend. The staff would still be heavily involved, but it wouldn't fall on their shoulders initially. It would really fall on your shoulders and the community shoulders. And then the staff could provide support as to some of the ideas and suggestions that come out of it. So that was probably way more than you wanted to know, but I get pretty excited about strategic plans.
that's okay. Well, thank you very much, Daniel.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
I'm done a little bit early, but I've done this same program and sometimes there's so many questions, we don't get through everything. So
Does anybody have any questions? Any other questions? There's certainly a lot of information, a lot of very good information, and clarified a lot of things for us too. So thank you very much. Could we just have a round of applause for Daniel? Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
there's one thing more I wanted to say, and I forgot to mention it this morning in the staff meeting. At the League of Wisconsin Municipalities Conference last year, they had a woman named Monica Guzman speak, and she wrote a book called I Never Thought of It That Way. And so they were giving out books. You could get her to sign it, and I never pass up a free book. And I didn't think much about it. And then a couple months later, I was at home and I was thinking, I guess you should pick that book up and just read it and see what it has to say. And the subtitle of the book is How to Have Fearlessly Curious Conversations in Dangerously Divided Times. And it has a lot of really great approaches, not one approach, not two approaches, but a lot of, I'd say 10 or 12 different approaches about how to get a group of people together who in normal course of events might be shooting at each other and have serious conversations about the issues that are challenging for both groups in terms of how this group looks at issue X versus this group looks at issue X. So highly recommend it. The deliberative governance on our website also covers a lot of these, some of the similar topic, but it's a good read, and I usually try to recommend this book when I'm speaking just because it has so many ways to get at that, issues that divide us or may divide some groups, as opposed to this is the best way and the only way. So
Very good.
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 Thank you all again. And was any of you here when we, on the board when we did this? Well, some of you were because you've been here forever. When you did the census presentation 3 or 4 years ago, I was the tall, ugly guy next to Patrick. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's just take about 5 minutes and boot up our tablets so we can proceed on with our meeting. And you can run down and get either healthy or unhealthy snack, whatever you choose. And we'll continue on at about 14 after. Thanks.
I turned the volume up on mine.
Yeah, that's the same.
I was gonna tell.
Why don't you just?
I turned it off.
I'll just tell them.
I won't be able to.
Yeah, because I think we can quick.
With all of those people standing in front of it, then you can't see and hear it. How you like that? Yeah. I was gonna tell them that. Well, instead of standing, I might as well leave now. Instead of getting up and just go to the meeting.
Yep, I'll just give her a buzz. And then we're recording, right? So. Yeah, it is live. Perhaps she's not doing it.
No problem. I actually didn't know where I was. What for the office. See what Hunter came in. You know, the also. I said, for the full event. So that's. Good for them. But he also.
Came here.
Send on the last one.
Is that?
Usually, there's enough.
Yeah, there's the first person like that.
It's a little guy. It's nothing for his business because you can see.
Yeah, so it's like, I don't know much about.
Yeah, like I said.
Yeah, like dog. Yeah. It gets, if you try to write it, that's good for you. It normally doesn't.
Oh, they got. You can have my share.
But if I were to.
Well, thank you so much. I'll be setting.
Oh, it's really unhealthy.
I don't have to hear this. There's so many. Even when it's, the roads aren't falling, saying this, I know you realize it's very slippery. Oh, yeah. Do what you call it again, I said, you realize these back. It's gonna take what, 2 o'clock. You know what, if you're the one to tell the other, get some of that over. This won't happen. You know what, it wasn't enough.
I was gonna tell you. Hunter.
Oh,
amazing.
That's like a. Property.
You know,
Broad business.
It's just, you know, and most studies too, so they're very well delineated.
Keep asking. and you get
It's on there. Are you going off with a pitch card? You know, just, they really need.
We had a football show. I saw it.
Flights back to Vietnam.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
AJ
did, yeah.
Instead of getting up halfway through, I'm leaving now. Sorry, I got it. Powers and Beast said we'd have it on this night. and,
Yeah, well, it's Sunday, yeah.
But we could have had it tomorrow night, since we never heard a thing. And I didn't get on it for 4 years, so next year I'm gonna make sure it ain't on the board night.
Okay.
So, take care.
Look at this.
Oh, fine.
Yeah, it's sort of the possibility.
Okay, we've got about 1 minute. We'll come back into session here.
And I'm like, no, that's never good.
You gotta get them quick there, Barry. Oh, it still isn't coming on. Is it, mine isn't coming on here when I sign it? Nope. Megan.
So Dave, I finally got a rocket
Megan.
book.
Yeah.
Mary is coming.
And.
Okay.
She'll be right in.
Okay.
Watching it on before I came here.
Yeah, we go. Yeah.
And
Could I just,
it just
yeah, go ahead.
really that
Just so you know,
I'm sure one of the pages.
Bob Waddle left.
before I
He had
sent
another
it
meeting he
here,
has to go to
before I
for
erased it.
township. So I
I
excused
think it's
him
an important
because,
one.
and Mark made it
Oh,
partway
no.
through because he's got the same
So
thing.
like,
Yeah.
all right,
Yeah.
no more rocket book.
No, Bart.
This is part of the learning curve.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, you do have another minute or so to get a cookie because we're trying to get connected here. So
That was strategic on Barry's part. He knew that he needed to get.
yeah, he's not gonna hurry that. He had to get the food first, and then we'll hook up later. Oh, sure. Wow, this looks pretty good. Mhm. Says it's connected. Yeah.
Oh,
yep,
no, it says
mine is-
something isn't right.
Yep, mine is connected. It says training presentation by Dan Foth. Okay.
And then,
I'll
okay,
try.
you should be able to connect
I'll
now.
try.
The IP address was wrong, but it should be good. Hey.
We're working, waiting for Pat and Mike, and then Melissa.
Everybody else is getting on okay?
Oh, I don't know, I haven't tried yet.
Oh,
I forgot that part. I had distractions in front of me here.
Looks good.
I'm gonna be like behind big wheel. Play on the phone.
You want to just grab Pat and Mike? There, we're ready to go. Are they there?
Don't let Bob see you. That stuff ticks them off big time.
What's that? Oh, thank you. All right. Thanks. Just for the record, mine was the one that was paid for, so. Not by me. Okay. Mike. No, he went, he left. Yes, he did. Okay. Let's get going, huh? We'll get started then. We'll start, stand and start with a silent prayer and the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, next order of business, I look for an approval of the agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Okay, motion by Bart,
I'll second.
who's second by Piaski. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, approval of the minutes of the March 21st, 2023 monthly meeting. Moved by Everett. Is there a second? Second by Dave. Is there any discussion on those? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, public comments. I haven't had any wish for public comments, so we'll go into unfinished business, new business, reports. County Administrator.
We turned the lights up.
All of them, there's one more. Now you all have to be awake. Thank you for coming in early for the presentation. It was very nice to have that, and I wish we would have been able to do that earlier, but better late than never. We're a year in, so to this board. After listening to him today, I think it would be good for us to set something up to go over the comprehensive plan. I personally haven't spent a lot of time, and I don't know, I just did a quick search on there, and it's on the UW Extension site, but I'm not sure if it's also on our site. You might know. Or yeah, and it is on the UW Extension site, but it says Patrick Nearing, contact Patrick Nearing if you have questions, and that's been a while. So it is a great thing to discuss now because we are working on a longer term plan with the CIP planning with the building project, doing a deeper dive to find out our needs and do some forward, more forward than, the next year and a half, because that's going to be very busy with the move and all the other construction that's going on. But it is a good time to do that. We did go to myself, Barry, and Bill from Veterans. We all went to an ICC meeting this last on Monday, yesterday, and it was all about strategic planning. And if I understand, Washara has done it a couple times, and sometimes it sounds like it gets done and then nothing happens with it. So I don't know what we want to do for a strategy about trying it again. If at first you don't succeed, try again. We do have Keith Melvin, who is the EMS director, and he does have a background in this sort of work. And I think when I talked to him yesterday, because Bill actually threw him on the bus and said he would be a really great person to drive something like that. And Bill might want to be co-pilot to maybe help us move things forward. There's so much going on with the building right now, but I think it's a good time because we're reviewing everything. So I'll get back to you on that, and I'll talk with Ruth and Todd about the comprehensive plan and get that information to you, and then we can make a decision about when and how we want to review that in a meaningful way. 17 of the 22 department heads did come to the training downstairs, had really good participation. So I was happy with that. A few dates that are coming up. So this Thursday, there is a meeting or a safety launch at the highway department, and it'll be at noon. So it's 100 days. Is it 100 days of no incidents at that building. And then on May 1st, we'll be doing the groundbreaking for the EMS. I didn't see it on the calendar, so I don't know if we've locked down 3:30 with Samuels.
I thought it was 4:30, but
4:30?
that's what I thought, because we have exec that day.
Okay, so I'll verify with Samuels tomorrow or Thursday. And then on May 11th, I won't be at this one, but the government center, there's going to be a 300-day safety day. And they're also going to be trying to do a mock-up of one of the courtrooms. So you see like what it's actually going to look like when you're in that space. So that would be over the noon hour as well. And Barry will get that information out when he gets that from the government center, right? They shared this morning at the buildings meeting, the owners meeting that we have monthly, that all the steel is up on the government center. And they also shared that they had 32 roofers on site today. Apparently they had a project that they couldn't be doing, so they all came here, and they think they'll be gone tomorrow because we're having some weather come. But 32 roofers, I think they could probably get a lot done today. I did mention the last couple of reports that we're working on the scanning quotes, so we don't have to move what's here to the new building. The Historical Society is coming tomorrow from Madison to come and get what they're taking from the treasurer. My office is getting through our records, and I have some quotes back, but we have to get 2 more quotes in order to because the price tag is high. So once I have those, I'll bring those to exec and then to the county board. And I think that is all I have. Oh, signs, sorry. We are meeting on Thursday afternoon with the Kellys, who are the FF&E for all the projects on the county government building signs, and going through what we need, what we don't need, getting the price breakdown, making sure that they're versatile so that we can change them out instead of every time, somebody changes that we have to buy a new sign or something. So we're going to make it as clean and simple as possible. So
And that's all interior stuff, because didn't you say today the highway is doing the
highway will be doing some of like the parking lot signs, but like the big monument sign will be done through Samuels, or I can't remember the name is, like 290 or something is the company's name. But yeah, we worked through that too, like what's going to be on the actual building.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions for Melissa? Okay. Hearing none. Thank you. Okay, we'll move into part B, discussion possible motion action items. I, opioid settlement proceeds request, rental assistance. Ruth, did you want to talk about that at all? It was in our packet too, but.
It
Your packet, this is coming back to you because it wasn't one of those things that we had thought about and discussed it when we did the priorities. So this is not sober living. It's for to pay a month's rent at an apartment here in Watoma for an individual who is working with our Child Protective Services unit who has 3 of her kids under court orders right now. And she is trying to work on her orders to get them back. And she had spent a period of time in treatment and was out of a job. And so they were asking for us to pay 1 month rent for her while she is working now, but to like get started, get some, so that she could start making some of her other appointments and get some feet under her ground. So they're asking for $600 to pay 1 month's rent for her.
Okay. Well, and I'd entertain a motion then to approve that money for that 1 month's rent. Okay, motion by Everett. Is it okay? Is there a second to that? Second by Bart. Is there any discussion? Yep.
Would this be something that we would consider like we've done in the past where we would make this like a
Added.
not have to come back again in the future if this request is made, Ruth?
If you would like to add, yes, I could do that.
Would you like to add that, Everett, to your? Okay. And the second is okay. All right. Very good. Any other discussion on that then? Okay, hearing none. Proceed to vote on your tablet. Okay, it passes. Part 2, personnel policy updates. Melissa, you can give us explanations on those. And we're going to vote on that as a group. Okay.
Okay, so there were 3 policies that we're looking to update, and they're in your packet. The first one is for payout of comp time. And the reason we're changing this, you need to get your comp time paid out each year, is it's just a reporting issue. If I don't pay you out your comp time in this calendar year, we have to go back and amend the Wisconsin Retirement WRS, how much they earned that year. So then we had to track it back to what did they earn, what was the comp time. So it was in the policy, I don't know how long ago, but we now with the new Tyler system, we need to move back to that policy. So it's just going to be paid out one time per year. Any questions on that one?
Anybody?
The second one is the funeral leave. So the policy was just a little unclear on what folks would get for funeral leave. And we wanted to make it clear that the spirit of the funeral leave is 3, if your immediate family, which is defined in the policy, passes away, you will have 3 days. I don't care which 3 days you take. You take your 3 days and we'll call it good. However that works out, whether that's the funeral arrangements, it's the funeral, it's traveling, or you just need that time, you get the 3 days. And then the one for the extended family. So when the other policy was in place, it would be like, well, it's the funeral's actually Saturday, so you don't get that day. And we decided that we want to make sure we're taking care of our folks and that they get the time off that they need. And I can assure you they probably would need more time than that. So any questions on that?
I've got a question.
Okay.
Any consideration about extending it to a longer or more days if there's a time or a mileage issue, if it's someplace, 400 or 500 miles away? Any
Well-
consideration to change that to 5 days for something like that?
We do have the ETO that's pretty generous. So like if somebody does need to use some more, usually they should have
Okay.
some extra. I
Yeah.
don't know what you're thinking. Then.
No, I agree. It's the very generous ETO policy we have here is usually not an issue, except maybe for a couple, if you're a very brand new employee, but it's normally not. Most people can't even use their ETO
Okay.
But we would take every instance into consideration.
Okay, thank you.
And then the last one is, and I wanted to clarify on this one. So the ETO is not, per our policy, we don't pay out ETO. We'll pay out vacation when you leave, but you don't get your ETO paid for or paid out. And so what has been happening is people have been they'll give their 2 weeks notice. This is where the problem comes in. They give their 2 weeks notice and then they have almost 2 weeks of ETO. So basically they're giving us no notice and they're using that ETO. And the policy doesn't say they can't do that. So that's what this policy is for. And there had been some questions about, well, why would I ever give notice or like a longer notice? Like for instance, public health, she gave us a really long notice so we could get a new supervisor. The policy states or administrator and county board executive. So it would be, if you're planning to leave in 6 months from now, we have that discussion and work that out prior to you retiring but this is specifically designed so that people don't give a very short period of time and basically the 2 weeks notice, it's not a notice, it's a payout is what it is.
And part of that was the wording was a little bit unclear, but you're going to make that, the intention of that clear to the department heads?
Yes, I will talk to the department heads to make sure that they understand
Okay.
that if you're pre-planning to, leave for if you give me 6 months notice, I'm not going to say you can't use any of your ETO time. I might say you can't use 2 months at the end. Well, yeah, well, it wouldn't be because you can only get 88 hours, right? You can't take all of that time in that last 2 weeks of the first two. It would be a discussion that we would have for the business side and the personnel side.
Okay. Okay. Dave, do you have a question?
I'll make a motion to approve those changes.
Okay. To change those 3 changes to the personnel policy. Is there a second? Second by Jesse. Is there any discussion on those? Dave?
I would just like to ask, is there any thought that the last one, the ETO issue, might result in people just using their ETO and not giving notice at all?
I would hope not, for a couple reasons, but it is already in our personnel policy to leave on good standing. If you are a non-supervisor, I think it is 2 weeks.
Yeah.
If you are a department head, I think you have to give 3 months, or there's a period of time. And if you don't, we don't have to pay out your benefits. So there's already an incentive for you to give us notice. So I would hope that they would not do this. And I think there's enough of us who have been around who have been burnt by this, because then we're trying to get something finished up because we know the person is leaving and the new person maybe hasn't started and we can't get a hold of anybody to finish something up. So I'm hoping with some discussion and talk about why this is happening, that it won't be a disincentive for people just to walk out the door.
Good. Thank you, Ruth.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other discussion? Okay. You can proceed to vote then.
Yes.
Okay. And they pass. Very good. Okay. Thank you. Part C, consideration, possible action on the following ordinances. Ordinance number 675, ordinance amending Waushara County zoning maps pursuant to the authority granted in Chapter 58 Waushara County Code Zone Change, Town of Mount Morris. These were all sent to you. I don't know if everybody read them. They're basically taking it from AG5 to AG4. So is there any discussion or a motion? Motion by Kirschner, second by Pat. Any discussion? Okay, hearing none, proceed to vote. Yep, all right, and it passes. All right, very good. In ordinance number 676, ordinance amending Waushara County Codes numbers 8, 18, 40, 42, and 58. There's a lot of stuff in there for that. Does any Okay,
Motion to approve.
okay, a motion by Pat, second by Dave. Is there any discussion on any of these? Okay, hearing none, then proceed to vote on your tablet. Okay, and they pass. Very good. All right, we'll go into appointments. Now, these we'll just do with voice vote. That's easier. Part D, number one, Transportation Coordinating Committees. Jan Novak, Watoma, term May 31st, 2023 through May 31st, 2026. And Mike Davis, Watoma, term June 1st, 2023 through May 31st, 2026. Is there a motion? Motion by Bossard, second by King. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Board of Adjustments. George Peterman, Watoma, April 2023 through April 2026. Dave Williams, Wild Rose, first alternate, term April 2023 through April 2026. And John Benz, Watoma, term April 2023 through April of 2026. Is there a motion for that? Motion by Kirschner, second by Eckstein. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, very good. All right, in proclamations, the first one is designating May 2023 as Older Americans Month. Is there a motion for that proclamation? Motion by Piaski, second by Eckstein. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, and recognizing May 14th through the 20th, 2023 as National Police Week and May 15th, 2023 as Peace Officers Memorial Day. Is there a motion? Motion by Bart, second by Mark. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. And the last one, recognizing May 7th through the 13th, 2023 as Correctional Officers Week. Is there a motion for that? Motion by Kirschner, second by Piaski. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, very good. Well, we got through that fast. Board suggestions for future agenda items. Does anybody have anything? Okay, hearing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Okay, moved by Eckstein, second. Second by Cap. We're adjourned. Thank you.
Can I just say something?
Sure.
I know you're adjourned. I just wanted to say, once you're adjourned, that, you're reading the Argus this week that we've been sold.
Oh.
And, so we've been owned by the Delphus Herald in Delphus, Ohio since about the 1970s. And, Murray owned us, died about 2 years ago. His daughter took over and she sold us to MMC, which is Multimedia Corporation or Channels, and it's out of Denmark, Wisconsin. So they bought the building, they bought the employees, and